Eagles lost. We had tons of injuries that affected our fantasy outcomes and might affect the real NFL as well. Some survivor sweats, but no real losses. That and a whole lot more coming up next on the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Jeff Erickson. He's Nick Whalen. It's Victory Lid Monday again for our respective intrepid co-hosts if you're streaming along with us. So happy that you could join us. For those who can't join us on the stream, Nick's wearing his Jaguars hat. I'm wearing my Bengals hat. There are no undefeateds in the NFL. A little early this year, Nick, for that. Usually we kind of get someone to like week 9, week 10. No super teams this year.
Yeah, I've spent most of the last like 2 or 3 weeks, Jeff, every time we talk about the Niners specifically, saying like, man, this team is just so bulletproof. You know, they can have 1 or 2 guys out, 1 or 2 of their stars not show up, and there's just so much depth on both sides of the ball that it's just impossible to imagine this team getting tripped up. Look, here we are. In steps PJ Walker. They go on the road at Cleveland. The offense completely breaks down. You know, we had injuries all over the place for the 49ers, but I think you could make the case that Cleveland was just as banged up in this game. I don't think injuries necessarily were the difference, but ugly game out in Cleveland. The weather certainly played a factor. Brock Purdy had some trouble hanging onto the ball. San Francisco, I think in the second half, was averaging 11 plus yards per third down. I mean, they were having trouble just generating positive plays in general for most of this game. So, yeah, not only San Francisco going down, Philly, of course, we'll dive into both of those games. Very much looking forward to breaking down what was I'm going to use the W word, Jeff, kind of a wacky Sunday slate.
Yeah. I thought you were going to do for win or something like that. But yeah, it was weird, wild, wacky weekend here in the NFL. And yeah, as Scott Pianowski likes to say, they're all weird, but this seemed especially weird. I agree. So let's just jump right into the slate. Let's start off with another stupid London game. I'm so tired of those, but hey, guess what? We'll have Frankfurt in 2 weeks, and I'm looking forward to the Frankfurt slate, but I'm not looking forward to the early wake-up calls. West Coast grouch. Okay, moving on. It was also not a game that rewarded you for waking up early either, this Baltimore-Tennessee game.
It sure did not. No, as I awoke on a couch of an Airbnb in Madison, Wisconsin at 8:30 a.m. to watch this game after spending the weekend in my alma mater city watching one of the saddest college football games of all time, Wisconsin going down to Iowa on Saturday. Woke up in kind of a fog, like, where am I? Had to flip on NFL Network, get the game fired up, and it was a field goal fest out in London. I think, kind of treating the more soccer-focused fans to something that they're used to. 6 made field goals on the day for Justin Tucker, 6 of 6, a long of 41, by the way. I mean, these were all, by Justin Tucker standards especially, these were basically just chip shots for him. Frustrating day offensively for Baltimore. I mean, they controlled this game from start to finish. This is really the second week in a row where it felt like the Ravens left like 10 to 14 points on the table. But it was a game where Lamar Jackson looked like the best player on the field. Ryan Tannehill really couldn't get anything going. He ends up exiting with an injury. It looks like this could be a multi-week injury, Jeff. So might be the Malik Willis show. We might be on the verge of seeing Will Levis at some point this season. Tennessee now sitting at 2-4. Jacksonville winning for the 3rd week in a row. Houston kind of looking like the second best team in the AFC South. I don't think the wheels are fully off for Tennessee at this point, but these next few games, like these are high pressure situations. Suddenly, like you feel like you need to beat the Atlanta Falcons next week, and they do have a bye coming up in week 7, so that helps. But sitting at 2-4, I mean, Tennessee's kind of on the brink right now, and we kind of felt like this might be the way that this season was heading for them from the jump.
Yeah, we floated the possibility of maybe them trading Tannehill. I know it'd been difficult to pull off given the contract status and given the fact that he really hasn't been lighting it up. The ankle injury takes that right off the table, though. No one's really going to trade for him if he's damaged goods. So that it kind of puts him in a spot. Malik Willis was a tough watch. Some scramble ability, but throw the ball. Just throw it somewhere, anywhere. Oh, my goodness, Nick. That sequence at the end. You don't want to throw an interception. I get that. The game speeds up. How bad does Will Levis have to be worse than Malik Willis? Because Malik Willis looked like the same guy as last year, just like afraid to pull the trigger, to the point where, the Titans ran it like 7,000 times when he started games. last season. Boy, just a big mess.
Malik Willis took 4 sacks in this game. He attempted 5 passes. So he was basically being sacked on like half of the time that he even dropped back. And, part of that is credit to a Ravens defense that I don't think we talk about Baltimore as being, one of the 5 to 7 best defenses in the league. I think they have been that so far this season, despite some attrition, in that secondary especially. But this has been a really, really good defense, and it's picked up the offense in a lot of ways. I mean, certainly the defense played well enough last week against Pittsburgh that Baltimore should have won that game. If you just make a couple of catches here and there, they're probably sitting at 5-1 right now. But yeah, I mean, Willis, I was kind of high on what he could be coming into last year, but he looked so green, he looked years away from being ready last season. And yeah, it makes you wonder. It's like, where's Will Levis right now? If Malik Willis is comfortably the number 2 quarterback, I mean, we don't really have a firm timetable on Ryan Tannehill quite yet. Injured the ankle, stayed in. I think kind of felt like he made it worse by staying in, and then was seen on crutches after the game. But again, it is a week 7 bye for Tennessee, so that does come at a good time. But if I'm a Titans fan, I'm bracing for Ryan Tannehill to probably miss some time after the bye. I know they have a Thursday night game coming up, so a short week. Could be seeing Malik Willis, could be seeing Will Levis at some point. But you mentioned it. I mean, even if this injury didn't happen for Tannehill, like what team right now is signing up to bring him in? Like, even if you're the Jets, like, are you that excited about bringing in Ryan Tannehill? Like, Kirk Cousins is Kirk Cousins, but to me, he's on a much higher level than Tannehill, and Cousins himself said he's not going anywhere.
Yeah, exactly. And he's got a full no trade clause. So he kind of controls that dialogue there too. Yeah, Tennessee tends to specialize in stockpiling green room leftovers. Whether it's Malik Willis. Remember, people are talking about Willis as a top 10 overall pick at one point in time in last year's draft. Yeah. Levis, we actually saw in the green room, was quite the celebrity there. Yeah, it's a mess there, but we'll see. They have a bye this week. So does they have a bye. They're one of 6 teams in Bipocalypse 1. We'll see what happens with this, but with Tennessee coming out of the bye week, but poor Tannehill goes to the wrong tunnel and then has to wait for a ride to get to the other tunnel. So he's quote unquote carted off. It sounds even worse. Little, not quite Jamal Charles carted off, but still had to catch a ride there. Spears looked good in that one long screen pass. I thought he was going to score. That would have made things really interesting there, but instead, and I needed the cover there. I needed that score. I was like, come on, an ideal situation here is score the touchdown, fail on the 2, get the cover, and we get out of there so the game's over with. Because I didn't want that to go to overtime. Had my pre-kickoff duties for everything else and all that, but Henry actually looked good at times. They got only 1 catch for Hopkins. Baltimore knew that there was no other threat. Westbrook-Ikhine dropped a touchdown pass on the first drive of the day. This could have been a different game if he holds on to that. It wasn't a drop, but it was a not hold on play.
Yeah. We saw a lot of that today, and weather, I think, kind of across the United States played a role in that. Certainly not in this game, but we saw Kyle Phillips, muff a punt that handed Baltimore 3 points right before the half too. DeAndre Hopkins wasn't having it; wouldn't even sit next to him on the bench. That ended up being big. This cover was very much in danger, by the way, at the end of the game. I mean, Tennessee, with about 1:20 left, had a 1st and goal. They were down at the Baltimore 1 at one point, and there was an illegal block. I think it was on Tajay Spears, kind of a cut block. That backed them all the way up. I mean, they were on the verge of just punching that in. I don't know why you don't just run it with Derrick Henry in that situation. Then Malik Willis is sacked. All of a sudden, it's 2nd and 20 from the 20-yard line. And, Tennessee at that point elects to kick a field goal on 3rd down, knowing it's a 2-possession game. I think given the limitations at quarterback, like, I understand it. It was basically, Mike Vrabel saying, like, we need a chance at some point with some time on the clock to get this onside kick. They, of course, did not get that onside kick, but for a moment there, it looked like Tennessee was absolutely going to cover this game, because if they punch in that touchdown, they're going for 2 to make that a 1-point game. So not only were we looking at a push as kind of a best case scenario if you're a Ravens better, but if Tennessee had scored from the 1-yard line and got the 2-point conversion, that would have made it a 3-point game. And of course, this one closed at 4. So I was sweating out the Ravens in staff picks this week. We did not use them in Circa. I could not quite talk John into it, but would not have been comfortable either way. A couple other fantasy notes here. I mean, not a great day through the air for Lamar Jackson. Still just this offense just looks a little off. They're not really getting any production from receivers not named Mark Andrews and Zay Flowers. Kind of another nothing day from Odell Beckham and Rashad Bateman. Nelson Aguilar continues to see wide receiver 2 snaps. That's not a good sign for the Baltimore Ravens. Derrick Henry for limited usage, 12 carries only in this game, did get to 97 yards, 63 of those coming on one play, had a touchdown. So a nice bounce back week for him. But you do worry about some of the trickle down effects. Like he's already struggling, and if they're missing Ryan Tannehill for a few weeks here, that does not help Derrick Henry's case whatsoever.
Nope, it does not. Bateman was the intended target on Lamar's one interception when he looked like he got a late reaction to the ball. It wasn't a good throw, but Bateman's effort was also not strong. I may have mentioned this. I definitely mentioned on the Sirius XM show. I don't think I mentioned on the podcast last week. I'm kind of done with Bateman. He is a cut in most of my leagues. I have one league where I have a super deep roster, but otherwise,
yeah. He played 34 of 71 snaps, and that's just not going to get it done. If you're playing fewer snaps than Nelson Agholor, who's proven to be a very bad player on multiple teams, I still like Bateman, the player. We talked on the XM show at length about just how much I loved him coming out of school. He was such a standout at Minnesota that it's hard for me to believe that he's kind of turned into this player in the NFL. But, he's going to be a reclamation project somewhere. I don't know if it's going to work out, but yeah, for season-long leagues this year, I think unless you're in a really deep format, he's easily droppable. Shouldn't even say probably. He's droppable.
Yeah, he is. So he may have to use him this week with buys and all that, but for the most part, there's gonna be some gnarly starts this week. I kind of enjoy that, but except for when I'm on the short end of that stick there too. Let's move on. We spent enough time on this.
Yeah, we do this every single week. We somehow spend way more time than we need to on the ugliest game of the week, but we'll mow through the rest of these.
The first one. Okay, we alluded to Baltimore. Not to Baltimore, to San Francisco, Cleveland. Let's talk about that one. The flags. The refs flagged for a double on this one here, or I guess it'd be a triple. Over 100 yards of penalty yards for each team in this game. Triple-double, I guess that would be. Hey, I spit it out eventually.
24 penalty yards. 224. That is absurd.
Yeah, and there were some huge game-deciding calls. On Cleveland's go-ahead drive, they got the benefit of two calls that were marginal at best. One for sure was just out of this world, and it was a third down play too. It was one that gave Cleveland a first down, and the guy got hit at the shoulder pad, right on the shoulder pads. It could have looked like the neck, or is the head snapped back on the play. I get it. It happens in real time, but that's not reviewable, and I think it should be. But there's a lot more at here. Let's talk the Niners side of things. They lost Deebo early, CMC in the second half, tried to come back, didn't take. We got some worries for this week coming up, and Trent Williams too in this game also got hurt, although I think he eventually came back. But still, Cleveland's defense is nasty. Even with those players back, it would have been a tough road to hoe for this Niners offense.
Yeah, San Francisco, after that first drive of the game where they marched right down and did benefit from two penalties, and they were both legit. They weren't controversial calls, but had two, I think, 15-yarders that helped them. You're thinking, all right, here we go again. San Francisco doing what they do against the backup quarterback. Browns throw a pick on their first possession, and that led to a missed field goal for the Niners, which maybe was more of a harbinger of things to come in this game. But the second half, San Francisco did nothing offensively. Nothing. You had the interception for Brock Purdy. The one touchdown that they got came off of another pick. Set him up, at the 6-yard line, just an easy run in for Jordan Mason. But other than that, it was a lot of 3-and-outs, a couple 4-and-outs. Obviously, the missed field goal at the end of the game, which I saw somebody did a a physics analysis of the ball and determined that the wind moved it almost 3 yards to the right in midair. So obviously, a kick that you want to make and you should make from 41 yards out, but the elements played a factor there. We saw Brock at one point in this game, drop back to throw, ball just slips right out of his hands. Not a player who has a ton of experience in these type of situations. So I don't view this as a kind of an indictment on Brock Purdy. Obviously, it was far and away the worst game of his career. The injuries played a part in that. You mentioned Trent Williams. He came back into this game. I didn't think looked like himself. Was still limping after the game. I think they'll reevaluate him. There's a chance that he could end up missing some time as well. But McCaffrey, injury-wise, I think that's who you're most concerned about here, right? Deebo, we kind of see this 2 or 3 times a year. He wasn't even in pads. He came out for the second half, was on the sideline in street clothes. Not a great sign. But McCaffrey is the one that we really, really need to keep an eye on here. They're calling it an oblique injury. Looked like he was just kind of banged up as well in the ribs. Just kind of the midsection in general is going to be a problem for Christian McCaffrey. So, Browns play Monday night this week at Minnesota, or 49ers, play this Monday night at Minnesota. They're at Cincinnati after that. They do have the bye the following week, but I think as of right now, you're probably bracing for at least 1 week without Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, the problem is, like you alluded to, the Monday night issue there. We don't know how much Mitchell's going to be cleared for how much he's going to be cleared for. Mason was ahead of him this past week. Mitchell generally is ahead of him on the depth chart. DY is asking in the chat, Mitchell or Mason, who are, if both are available. And I did sneaky ads with Alan earlier today, and we looked at on Yahoo, Mason's 6% roster and Mitchell is 25% rostered. So there's a lot of people dropped Mitchell because they had bye week crunches or they got tired of waiting for him. Who are you picking up first?
I think it's Jordan Mason for me. And honestly, I'd be comfortable with either of them because I think they're both going to have a role if we expect Christian McCaffrey to miss a week or two. You got a pretty nice matchup against Minnesota next week. You have a Cincinnati defense after that has been pretty exploitable on the ground. So I think both of these guys could be sustainable. We did see Jordan Mason play 15 snaps in this game, 7 for Elijah Mitchell. All 15 of Mason's came after the injury to McCaffrey. So once McCaffrey was out of this game, Mitchell or Jordan Mason was the guy over Elijah Mitchell. Obviously, Mitchell has a little bit more history with this team, a little bit more injury history of his own. But I would give slight priority to Jordan Mason. I do think we could see 60-40 split, even closer to a 50-50 split over these next couple of weeks. But I'm bracing for Christian McCaffrey to miss some time here. We'll see what the ultimate timetable ends up being. But with 6 teams on bye next week, chances are you're going to need some help at running back no matter what. So I would give slight priority to Mason, but I'm happy to grab both of them.
Yeah, and our problem is like a lot of waivers run Tuesday night or Wednesday, but the Niners' first practice won't be till Thursday. And so we're going to have waiver runs in most of our leagues, except for maybe I have some Thursday afternoon waiver runs, but for the most part, most of mine are going to be done before the Niners even have their first practice. So Mitchell is obviously the guy that's done more over his career. So if I knew he were 100%, I'd go Mitchell, but I just can't assume that. That's my problem. So big win for Cleveland. They did this. They win without Deshaun Watson. We don't know when Watson's going to play. Jay Glazer was saying on the Fox Sunday morning preview show that Watson's got the muscle underneath the rotator cuff that's preventing him from basically having his fastball. He's basically throwing it like 85%. And you need to dial it up at times as a quarterback there. So he could play next week. He could not. The problem is they've already had their bye too. So you're not going to get, just coming off the bye, in fact, which makes it even more problematic. They get the Colts next week in Indy. Could be interesting, but could be difficult too.
Yeah, we're still just going to be going week to week with Deshaun Watson. And obviously it didn't really seem like he was all that close to playing in this game. So, getting another week, that's all well and good. That's only going to help, but I don't think there's any guarantee that he's back for that Indy game. And, PJ Walker, he looked better than the DTR, but, still threw 2 picks, was not amazing by any means, although going up against a pretty difficult opponent in the 49ers. I think if you're the Browns sitting at 3-2, if you got to go 1 or 2 more weeks with PJ Walker, you probably feel okay about surviving. But this Watson situation is just strange, man. There's still kind of a, Watson versus the team element here, as far as, the team clearing him to play prior to the bye passing. And I think everybody expecting Deshaun Watson to be back. And then, as the week went on, it became increasingly clear that was not going to be the case. But, if Cleveland has to kind of ride the ground game, I think they're okay with that. We'll see what they could do against Indy. Jacksonville didn't have a ton of success on the ground yesterday against those Colts, but it helps when Gardner Minshew's tossing 3 picks. Jerome Ford, 17 for 84 on this 49ers defense. Kareem Hunt, I thought looked pretty good. He goes 12 for 47 and a touchdown. Had a couple nice plays through the air as well. Tough to really have too many takeaways from either offense. I do think the conditions played a big part, and when you have 2 top 5 defenses going at it too, I think that really showed through.
The conditions always seem to play a part in Cleveland too. I mean, week 1 was the same thing. Last year we saw it's going to get worse, by the way. It's going to get windier and colder. We're going to have some other games. So I think that's one thing you got to keep in mind when even like Amari Cooper, who looked phenomenal yesterday, is going to get hurt by this later on this season.
He is. And, Browns are on the road the next 2 weeks, so kind of keep that in your back pocket for now. But yeah, Amari Cooper was kind of the saving grace. Really, the only thing that could get going in the passing game. He had one long contested catch that was going to go down as one of the better catches we'll see all year.
Absolutely, and he was getting open a lot all day too. I was impressed. Let's remain in the division. Hoo-day! Let's go with the Bengals and the Seahawks. If you missed the first half, you missed all the good stuff, all the offense at least. The defense for the Bengals was just amazing, though, in the second half, especially when they needed to. I mean, they gave up some yards at times, but they really locked down. The pass rush was getting to Geno Smith a lot in this game. And Cam Taylor-Britt, if you don't know, if you know, you know. If you don't know, you should find out, because Cam Taylor-Britt is the truth. He is so good.
As somebody who was on Seattle in this game, and we actually took Cincinnati in Circa on John's backing. I trusted him on that one, so props to John. We got the cover. I think it was at 2.5 in favor of Cincinnati. But I thought Seattle deserved to win this game, Jeff. I'm just going to say it. I know you're a Bengals fan. How many chances did Seattle have in the second half to go up? And I thought the Seattle defense played pretty well in its own right.
Seattle defense was phenomenal.
Right. Burrow looked fine. He looked mobile to me. I don't think the calf was necessarily an issue, but both teams kind of grinded to a halt offensively in the second half. But Seattle had 3 times in the second half that they turned it over inside the 10-yard line of the Cincinnati Bengals. One of those, bad pick by Geno Smith. 2 more times late in the game, they had opportunities after forcing quick punts by the Cincinnati Bengals, drove all the way down the field, went out on downs twice. Just kind of bizarre play calling. I thought, Geno Smith, he was under siege. This was not a banner day for the Seattle Seahawks offensive line, but I also thought Geno was holding the ball way too long, just not getting rid of it. Plays that somebody who's been in the league as long as Geno Smith has, like just get rid of it, just get rid of the ball instead of taking some of these crushing sacks. Seattle just, like I said, they were putting together really nice sustained drives, and then once they would get inside the red zone for Cincinnati, everything just broke down offensively. One positive takeaway for Seattle, we saw Jackson Smith-Njigba get a little more involved. 5 targets, 4 catches on those 5 targets for a career high 48 yards. Still, not quite the massive breakthrough performance that you'd like to see. But we talked a lot about him the last couple of weeks. A slow start for Smith-Njigba. If nothing else, good to see him a little bit more involved against a good defense.
Yeah, I agreed. And you saw a little bit more Charbonnet too.
Yes.
Saw a little Jake Bobo actually too. Had a couple of big catches.
Couple big catches, yeah.
Geno held on to it a little too long, but I think he's earned enough that he shouldn't be in jeopardy. But
no.
I do think maybe he's a little less mobile. Remember, he hurt his knee in the late against the Giants before the bye in that Monday night game, came back in the game. I think that affected his ability to elude the pass rush. The Bengals have a good pass rush, though. Hendrickson's a beast out there. You got Sam Hubbard on the other side who does a lot of damage, too. But Taylor-Britt was getting into Metcalf's head. Metcalf took a horrible penalty, just a horrible penalty, way away from the ball. And there's obviously some trash talking going on there, but he just straight out shoved Taylor-Britt and right in front of the ref, and is like, what did I do?
Yeah, he's good for like 1 or 2 of those every year, it feels like.
Yeah, he is. The Bengals' first 2 drives were awesome offensively, and then they did nothing after that, like almost nothing. Chase got open a couple times, but Seattle dialed up their pass rush. They have a legit, real good pass rush. They kept Mixon pretty well bottled up. They kept Chase pretty bottled up. Higgins had another rough game. Had a drop, had a penalty. I feel like Higgins draws extra scrutiny. Every week he seems to get 1 OPI. That's not scientific, but I feel like that's something that hurts him a little bit there. That he seems to get more negative attention from the refs than Chase does. So.
That's your wide receiver 64 on the year, T. Higgins, by the way. Cooper Kupp has played 2 games, and he's produced more fantasy points in PPR leagues than T. Higgins. So, yeah, I was trying to get T. Higgins everywhere. Like, he just somebody that I was always happy to grab as a second receiver. There's a kind of a lot of situations where, especially if you're picking at the end of round 1, you could pair him with one of the the top flight receivers, and you felt great about it. And it's been a bust season so far. And I think T. Higgins. Oh, yeah. I mean, I think at some point he's going to come around. The track record is too good. This offense is too good. And I think, the healthier Joe Burrow gets, it's not going to be as bad as it's been through 6 weeks. But, I mean, this is close to worst case scenario if you were a manager of T. Higgins. You look at some of the overall stats in this game. I mean, Seattle completely controlled the clock, completely controlled the pace of this game, and they ran 70 plays. They racked up, 170 more yards than the Cincinnati Bengals. Yeah. But, again, just could not could not finish drives. 1 of 5 in the red zone.
So the Bengals have the 2 worst wins by expected wins. The Seattle game and the Rams game, both.
Yes.
Both we got outgained on it. The metrics are what they are. I mean, Bengals just know how to win. That's all there is to it, though, Nick. But not just kidding.
Well, I mean, getting this win before the bye, and playing T. Higgins, having T. Higgins, even though he had a bad game, like having him emerge without re-injuring those ribs, like that is huge. Like this is, given that you were 1-2, you escaped that Los Angeles game in week 3, feeling like you probably shouldn't have won. To be sitting at 3-3 now, going into the bye, getting healthier. You got some tough games coming out of the bye, but all of a sudden that game at San Francisco, it's like, all right, maybe McCaffrey's not available. We'll see on Deebo Samuel after the bye. I think certainly you're never going to feel great about going on the road at San Francisco and then getting Buffalo after that. Even the Houston game in week 10 looks a lot more difficult than it did coming into the year. But I also think, there's a case to be made that you're catching San Francisco at a reasonable time, especially coming off a bye.
Exactly. Well, it's the Bengals' chance to win the NFC West, so I'm looking forward to that too. So we'll see about that. Let's move on. Let's hit your Jacksonville Jaguars. Victory Monday. Victory lid Monday. They win a game where Trevor Lawrence didn't do a ton. They didn't need him to do a ton. Gardner Minshew did it for them, and Travis Etienne did it for them. The defense played great. Etienne looked awesome. That's my big takeaway. Is I told everybody Etienne would be fine. I wanted to get Etienne, and Nick, I have no Etienne. I hate it when I'm right and I don't benefit from it.
He was somebody you had to pay up for in a lot of ways, right? I think a lot of people were on the Travis Etienne train, and it felt like it cooled off a little bit as draft season went along. But in best balls especially, that was somebody that you had to make a point to typically jump ADP for. This was not a huge game for him in terms of yardage. 18 for 55, did have one long run, finished with 2 touchdowns. I mean, he's the RB3 now on the year, Jeff, behind only Christian McCaffrey and Raheem Mostert, thanks to these last couple productive weeks. But the Colts defense, I thought, actually held up pretty well. It was, as you mentioned, it was Gardner Minshew turning the ball over. I mean, he threw 3 picks in this game, and could have thrown probably at least 2 more. I mean, Devin Lloyd had 3 dropped interceptions on his own, and one of those he dropped, and then I believe Minshew threw a pick on the next play. So the Jacksonville defense very quietly leads the NFL in turnovers forced. 15 forced turnovers through 6 games for Jacksonville. We did not necessarily think that would be a strength for this team. I think the defensive line, the pass rush, continues to be relatively inconsistent. Did have 3 sacks today, but I think that's still an area of concern. But this secondary, playing without Tyson Campbell has been fantastic. I thought that was a mistake by Jacksonville not making more of a point to address that secondary this offseason. They held firm, but guys like Rayshon Jenkins, Darius Williams has been fantastic. Andre Cisco, all 3 of those guys had picks. This secondary has really come around for Jacksonville, and things are starting to look easier for the Jags. Like that was my big criticism through the first 3 weeks of the season was they were making things tough on themselves. They're throwing a lot of like kind of lateral passes, short passes, not really asking Trevor Lawrence to do much. Like when you have a talent like that, when you have the receivers that they have, you got to kind of air things out a bit more. And we didn't see a ton of that. I think we saw a more conservative game plan once Jacksonville grabbed the lead early, but this was not a game where Trevor Lawrence had to do a whole lot just because of Gardner Minshew, just handing Jags the football over and over and over. One last thing I'll say on this. Minshew started 9 of 9. The Jaguars gave up a 16-play field goal drive to begin this game. Like the first quarter ended before the Jags even finished their first possession. So at first you're thinking, all right, this might be a low-scoring game. Yeah, right. I mean, 9 of 9. Like Minshew was just nickel and diming them, and then after that, things completely fell apart. Minshew had the sack fumble on the second possession, and the Jags were kind of off and running from there. But yeah, feeling a lot better about Jacksonville. Was another relatively quiet week for Calvin Ridley. He kind of continues to waffle back and forth. Like Christian Kirk has actually kind of low-key been the Jaguars' #1 wide receiver since week 1. He's dramatically outperformed Ridley.
Bench Kirk in one league. I feel great shame about that one there. I'm loaded at wide receiver in that league. It's funny, but Trevor Lawrence got hurt at the end of the game. Hurt his knee. They play on Thursday at New Orleans on turf. How are we feeling about this?
I'm not too concerned. I think there's been optimism over the last 12 hours. He's going to undergo an MRI, but we got the report that you're always looking for, which is that they don't think there's any damage. Again, we'll see what that MRI ends up showing, but I think there was some more concern because Lawrence didn't come out for the kneel downs on the final possession. But Doug Peterson basically said, I don't even know if he would have been out there anyway in that situation.
Sure.
So kind of a weird play where he went down late in the game, and we didn't. There was so little time left that I think Lawrence probably would have stayed in. Like, he was walking around on the sideline. It looked worse, I think, in real time than it actually was. So I'm not super concerned. But again, the fact that you're playing on the road on a Thursday does add a little bit more concern to that. But overall, I think he's going to be fine. In terms of the backfield split for the Colts, almost 50-50. Zach Moss pulled ahead in terms of snaps late in this game. I think Jonathan Taylor was just kind of out for the last drive that the Colts had. So that's when we saw Zach Moss pull ahead. But prior to that, it was essentially a 50-50 split. With the Colts trailing most of the game, they only carried the ball 15 combined times, 8 for Jonathan Taylor, 7 for Zach Moss. So I think we got the split that we thought. Obviously, you were hoping if you're rostering either of those guys that the Colts aren't down 2 scores for the entire game and you're getting more volume. But overall, I think, kind of what you expected as far as continuing to ramp up Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah, and he was very active in the passing game, which I like seeing too. There, had 6 targets, 5 for 46 on that one there. Michael Pittman, 8, got 14 targets. Of course, when your quarterback throws it 55 times and gets sacked 3 others, you're gonna get a lot of target share there. Yep. I actually had some Josh Downs going for me. I used him in DFS. He got 8 targets. They're all short. Did get the score at least to kind of to justify the day, to justify the usage, but it was one of those where was hoping for a little bit more downfield on that.
Yeah, got bailed out on the touchdown if you started him, which is fine. Just a play where really nice route by Josh Downs. Jags defender kind of slipped coming out of the break, and it was a pretty easy throw and catch for Minshew, 2 downs. But certainly helped there if you're getting 58 dropbacks from Gardner Minshew, not necessarily again the script that we wanted there. Alec Pierce did get hurt in this game, did not return. Saw a little bit more of Amari Rodgers of all people. I had no idea that Amari Rodgers was on the Colts.
I know. Old friend Amari Rodgers there.
Yeah. One of the most hated Packers of all time.
It's so funny how that works. They get Cleveland next week, as we alluded to. So, I'm not going to want to start Minshew this week. I don't care what the element, it's indoors. I still don't want to face that Cleveland pass rush. No. I'll start Taylor if I have him. I'm not going to be happy about it. It'll probably be ranked around 15 to 20, somewhere in that range. Yeah, I think I'd have to start Pittman even with the bad matchup, but just because by apocalypse, I'm probably not going to do better. It's not a great week for your Colts next week.
No. And last thing I'll say on this game, Evan Ingram, 7 catches on 7 targets for 41 yards, had a really nice one-handed catch over the middle. He's now put up double-digit fantasy points in PPR leagues in 4 of the last 5 weeks. So tight end, still a minefield week to week, but he's kind of sitting right where he should. He's tight end 6 through 6 weeks.
Yeah, and Kirk, all these guys. First of all, they didn't have to throw it that much, and then there was no Zay Jones this week either. So
that matters. That definitely matters
a lot.
I mean, Zay Jones means probably more to this offense than he should, but that is a big piece for Jacksonville.
You know what I also noticed, and I haven't seen the replay of this game, but we didn't have any Agnew weirdness this week. Go figure.
He didn't lose a fumble.
Blowout.
He did not lose a fumble. That's all you can ask from Jamal Agnew. Did not have any touches, either as a runner or a pass catcher. Obviously, he's still handling kickoffs and punts, but I think I would love to see the Jaguars numbers when Jamal Agnew does not lose a fumble. I feel like they've never lost in those scenarios.
They very well could be. So we'll go from one hated gadget player to another. Let's talk about the Saints and the Texans.
Oh my goodness,
Saints! Oh, they are such a tough watch, Nick. I mean, I know they won comfortably last week against the Pats, who are the toughest watch in the NFL. But Derek Carr is a check down master, and he kept on checking down to Taysom Hill a lot. Hill, I think, had.
You love that.
8, yes, I do. I love it. Can't get enough of it. 7 for 49 on 8 targets. So I mean, it was kind of efficient. Hill only ran at one time, so it was less Hill than I thought. But the play that stands out to me is emblematic of the Saints offense. 4th and 4, and they throw a check down out to Alvin Kamara, and it ends up 2 yards short. And they don't convert. It wasn't even close to converting. And I understand. Hey, you get Kamara out 1-on-1 out in the flat. Take your chances. I get it. You get the ball in the hands of your playmaker, but I hate 4th down plays short of the sticks like that. Hate it. And that's the Saints offense in a nutshell. They missed field goals in this game. They're just, all sorts of weirdness going on there.
So this game, the Seattle-Cincinnati game and the Atlanta-Washington game, I felt like played out almost the exact same. Like the Saints had so many opportunities late in this game to win, and they could not get it done. You mentioned the missed field goal. I think that influenced some of the play calling down the stretch. That would have only made it a 4-point game, so you still need a touchdown at that point. But I think if you look back, it's like I don't think the Saints thought they would have as many opportunities as they did. And I think you can say the same thing about Atlanta, and you can say the same thing about Seattle. And it's like all these possessions where you're either turning it over or you're going out on downs deep in the opponent's territory. It's like you look back and you're like, man, we could have just kicked the field goal and won the game if we had known that we would continue to get stops and continue to get the ball back. But over and over, you got to credit this Houston defense for getting stops. That short throw to Kamara that you mentioned on 4th down. I mean, the Saints were set up with a 2nd and 3 at the 14-yard line, ran Kamara twice for -1 yards. And then, that brings up the 4th and short. And, Derek Carr just does what Derek Carr does in that situation and makes a bad decision. But even after that, you force a very quick punt by Houston. You get the ball back with plenty of time, almost 3 minutes on the clock. Saints put together a 12-play drive, get all the way down again, close to the red zone. And Derek Carr throws a pick because you're backed into this 4th down situation where you kind of felt like you just had to throw it up. Bad throw, ended up being intercepted. They reviewed it. The defender brought it down. Wouldn't have mattered anyway. It was 4th down. But yeah, the Saints, man, they're poorly coached. The execution has not been there. And I think, at least me, they tricked me with that game against New England last week. I thought, all right, maybe the offense is finding something. Like, I know it's the Patriots. I know they're terrible, but it's still a defense that you have to respect. No, we're back to being the same old Saints. This is a team that's going to struggle to score 20 points most weeks.
Yeah, it's frustrating as all hell. I mean, again, the division is starting to live down to expectations. The Bucks are playing better. They lost yesterday and didn't look great doing so. But the Saints are just okay. You have a good defense. That's great. You have Olave. You have Kamara. You have playmakers. And then they this big hey, we're gonna stay competitive by signing Derek Carr, and it's just like he's Andy Dalton +1, maybe.
If that. Yeah, Carr, he's just looked bad, man. And I thought Carr would be an upgrade. I thought he, kind of got shafted a little bit with how things ended in Vegas, but he hasn't looked any better to me. He's looked, I think he's given them about exactly what Andy Dalton was last year and maybe a little bit lower. I almost trust Dalton more in these late game scenarios.
Yeah. Meanwhile, on the Houston side of things, kind of a sloppy offensive game for them. I think one of my takeaways is that they actually have a pretty decent defense, but we saw CJ Stroud throw his first interception, only threw for 199 yards. They kind of bottled everybody up. Nico Collins still got his 80 yards. Schultz is becoming a more frequent target now. Early in the season, Schultz wasn't getting targeted that often, but maybe because Tank Dell was out with the concussion that Schultz got more targets. Robert Woods got the score, and that's about it. I picked up John Mechie in a league thinking, okay, he's going to step up. He didn't even get a target in this game.
Yeah.
Noah Brown instead was the guy that stepped up a little bit more. And Devin Singletary was a better runner than Dameon Pierce. And that's a big concern for me because Pierce is nothing in the passing game. So if Pierce isn't running the ball and he's losing carries to Singletary, what do we got here? Heading into the bye week with Pierce, I'm kind of like, okay, giving him a break, and then we'll reassess after the bye with him because it's really frustrating being a Dameon Pierce manager right now.
Yeah, the workload was split pretty evenly between those two. 13 carries for Pierce. He put up his usual 34 yards on those 13 carries, 12 for Singletary for 58. But what's more concerning is when you dig in on the snap counts, Jeff, 34 snaps for Devin Singletary, 21 for Dameon Pierce. So that is a notable downturn. He did run 7 routes, but like you said, they almost never look for him in the passing game. That's not really something you could count on. I mean, it's been a slog. I don't really see that changing. And now with Singletary emerging as somebody who could take some of those snaps away, I think I would say you could try to sell Dameon Pierce, but I don't know who's buying at this point.
Yeah. It's a real problem. By the way, Chandler's got a CJ Stroud question. We'll go ahead and bring that up. Chandler asks, can only hold 2 QBs. He's got Fields, who's now hurt, and the report on him, we'll talk about it, but he's not expected to play this week. And Stroud, who's on bye. Would you trade Stroud, Jerome Ford, and Terry? I'm assuming that's Scary Terry McLaurin for Burrow and Lockett. I mean, normally I would, but you got the same problem. Burrow's on bye this week too. So, I mean, I think in terms of value, this is a good trade. But it doesn't address your problem. So we'll see about that.
Yeah, I think if you're just kind of assuming that you'll pick somebody up for this coming week, then yes, do that trade because all
Yeah.
three quarterbacks that we're talking about here are probably not going to be available. Two obviously will not because they don't have games, and then we'll talk about Fields in a moment. But the initial report from about a half hour ago is that the Bears are calling him doubtful. Which when you get that this early in the week, I would say highly likely that Justin Fields will not be playing. They said it's going to come down to whether or not he can grip the football, and my guess is that we see him sit at least a week. But yeah, in a
I was gonna
vacuum,
say
I think you
multiple
make
weeks.
that trade.
Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
much rather have Joe Burrow. Worth noting, I mean, this was definitely CJ Stroud's worst game. 13 for 27 for 199. Did throw his first pick of the season to Zach Bond, ex-Badger, who promptly fumbled the ball back to Houston right after the pick. So it actually ended up being like a net loss of like 3 yards and then a new set of downs for Houston. And that's just kind of the day it was for New Orleans. You get that big break. Like it was funny. Like as soon as Zach Bond caught the ball, you could see, obviously not somebody who's familiar with carrying it. Like it looked like he should have fumbled. Like he was kind of doing like the LaShawn McCoy. The arms are going all over the place. Was not surprised to see that ball come out. But nonetheless, the streak is over for CJ Stroud, who, despite only having 13 completions, I mean, a couple of those were bangers, man. He had one kind of an outbreaking flag route to Nico Collins, guy bearing down, kind of leaned back in the pocket, just dropped it out there perfectly. I mean, he continues to look really, really good.
Yep. And he's not going to have a first place schedule either. So,
Yep.
I mean, this is something that works in his favor a little bit too. Uh, Before we move on, I got to share a couple of notes. First, we're on the Blue Wire Network. Here are their ads. Also, we have our podcast today is brought to you by the good folks from Circa. Get ready for the ultimate big game parties at Circa Resort and Casino. Super Sunday is in Las Vegas this year. Watch the big game poolside at Stadium Swim's big game viewing party. I know Nick's a big fan of Stadium Swim.
I love the big game.
Yeah, and the big game. Massive screen, booming game sound, and a view of the pyrotechnic and visual effects throughout the game. Snag the best seat in the sun with daybeds, poolside boxes, cabanas, and more. Our touchdown at the world's largest sportsbook, Circa Sports, for the Big Game Bash. 3 stories of football glory featuring a 78 million pixel screen. Book your seat with a variety of reservation options, including bottle service, open bar, stadium-style food, and more. Don't miss these legendary viewing experiences on February 11th. The big game parties only at Circa Resort and Casino. Reserve today at circalasvegas.com. Jeff Erickson here with Nick Whalen, and thank you for your patience there. Let's talk a little bit about, let's stay in the NFC South. You alluded to this game earlier here, the Atlanta game, just the Washington-Atlanta game. You're right. I mean, early on, Washington was dominating this game. Late in the game, the fourth quarter was one of just a comedy of errors by the Falcons. I mean, you had a delay a game, down by the goal line there, which is just awful stuff. And then the next play, they threw an interception in the end zone where they snapped the ball with like a second left on the play clock after a delay a game, forced into a bad throw or Ritter threw on his back foot. Just inexcusable stuff here. There were some positives, but the mistakes just totally outweighed everything here.
Yeah, the late game execution, the red zone execution was just unbelievably bad by the Atlanta Falcons. Multiple times where it seemed like there was some confusion getting the play in, some confusion, trying to change the play as the clock is going down. I compared this to the CIN-SEA Seattle game, as well as the New Orleans Houston game. I mean, Atlanta had chance after chance after chance after chance to win this game after going down 24-10. Ritter throws his first pick of the day on the first drive of the second half, and you're thinking, all right, this might be over the way Washington's playing. And from then on, Washington finishes punt, and Atlanta just kept having opportunities. They scored a touchdown towards the end of the third quarter, opted to go for 2, did not get it, made that an 8-point game, and I feel like that. I don't know if that just kind of led to some uncomfortability or what, but it felt like Atlanta was pressing from then on out. And I mean, both of the interceptions by Ritter, horrible. I mean, especially the second one, kind of off his back foot, throws way short, easy interception in the end zone. Another game where I think, again, if Atlanta knew that they would keep getting the ball back over and over, it's like, oh, we'll just kick 3 field goals and win this game by 1. But they were repeatedly able to get into the red zone, and things just fell apart from there. For a team that has so many weapons and 2 really good running backs in Tyler Algier and Bijan Robinson, the amount of passing in the red zone to me is bizarre. Like Desmond Ritter, that should be a desperation situation only. He should not be throwing the ball when you're within 10 yards of the end zone and you have this offensive line and this running game. And granted, Washington held up okay against the run. Neither Algier nor Bijan Robinson had a huge day on the ground. And that's actually becoming a trend for Atlanta. Like they remain committed to the run, but they have not been racking up big time yardage totals these last few weeks. They were under 100 yards as a team last week. They only got to 106 as a team this week. And part of that was Desmond Ridder getting loose on a couple of scrambles. But, we saw Ridder play the best game, I thought, of his career a week ago. He got to 300 plus yards in this game. That is a lie. If you watch Desmond Ridder in the second half, it was disastrous. If you just watch Arthur Smith's face in the second half, you knew what was going on. I think this is a coach that has lost faith in his quarterback. It seems like they're really resisting, the Taylor Heineke talk, but you got to think about it at this point, man. I mean, this was brutal by Desmond Ridder.
It was, and opposing teams are saying, okay, Bijan is not going to beat us. With this running game, we're going to take that away from you. We're going to make Desmond Ridder beat you. And they barely pulled it out against Houston. But, the Jacksonville game, he was terrible. The Detroit game, he was pretty terrible. You notice in the Detroit game, Detroit shut down that running game big time. Yep. And, Detroit's awesome against the run. Not a real shocker there. But Washington is just okay against run, and they loaded up against that. And then later on, they dialed up the pass rush when they had a lead, and they're trying to protect that lead. Roberto asks about a Bijan trade. Roberto in the chat asks, what about Breece Hall for Bijan? Breece Hall, he's getting more work now. He's looking pretty good. The Jets have their tough part of their schedule's done. They're on bye this week. But they're one of the 6 teams on bye-pocalypse. But I don't know. I'm thinking about this one here, and I almost can kind of see it, except it's a similar team profile. Team led by a bad quarterback with a great running back.
Yeah, and I think Bijan and Breece Hall have been really comparable so far. I think the kind of boom bust potential has been very similar week to week. Yeah, I think with Bijan, the workload has been there no matter what. I mean, he's had double-digit carries in every game, regardless of the script. He still had 5 catches for 43 in this game. So I still think I trust him to have a higher floor week to week, but I think Breece Hall has to be viewed as having a higher ceiling at this point. And, if you're concerned about bye weeks, like you said, Jets are off this week. Atlanta doesn't have its bye until week 11. But I would consider that trade, man. If you're frustrated with the Bijan Robinson experience, I mean, these last 2 weeks, 27 carries for 83 yards. The teams are loading up. Like you said, teams are going to force Desmond Ridder to beat them. I think you'll happily, cede 300 plus yards to Desmond Ridder every week, because the more he's throwing the ball, the more that creates opportunities for turnovers. And we saw that yet again.
Yeah. Bijan was the target on the game-ending interception on a slant. I was like, which wide receivers? Oh, no, that was Bijan running a slant. And honestly, it was a good play by the defender breaking on the ball. I didn't really, and he might have gotten away with a little bit of a hold too. But, that one, it was like kind of excusable, especially for the game circumstances. They just had to get it done. But still, But, and like there was like, they wasted time on that drive, of that very last drive too. I mean, there's just, the whole thing was just very frustrating to watch. Washington side of things, Terry McLaurin didn't score, but he looked really good. They made a point of throwing to him early. I think after all the talk about him and Dotson not doing much in the Thursday night game against the Bears, they made sure to reestablish Scary Terry. They didn't do that with Dotson though. Dotson is just, for whatever reason, he is just not getting the work. Only 1 target in this game. I mean, it's tough to roster a guy in this situation because, Samuel's getting more looks. Diami Brown only got 1 target, nearly came down with a deep ball. But this also was a game where Howell had a hard time getting rid of the ball. He got sacked 5 times. I think scrambled a few others. I think Sam Howell is just a free sack, is what he is. Yes. He holds that ball a long time. But I think that's one of the reasons why Dotson gets hurt a little bit too.
Yeah, I mean, the snaps have been there for Dotson. He played basically the same number of snaps as McLaurin in this game, ran 25 routes, but just 1 target. I mean, this was a very heavy Terry McLaurin game. Curtis Samuel was the only other player who had more than 1 target in the passing game for Washington. And, the offense kind of turtled up in the second half. They really didn't do anything after that initial touchdown following the first Ridder pick. So I think that was a little bit part of it. Commanders, that's where a lot of those sacks happened as well. I thought the Falcons defense certainly played well enough in the second half and given the 3 turnovers to win this game. But yeah, it's been a frustrating experience for Jahan Dotson owners. I mean, I don't think at this point he's remotely startable. I think you can justify maybe hanging on to him on a bench, but you can't throw him out there right now.
I mean, this week, if you can't start him and there's 6 teams on bye,
Right.
he has to be a cut then, doesn't he?
I think so. And, I think you can try to trade him again, but you're trying to trade him at his lowest point. So, good luck getting that done. I mean, even if you could just get some depth piece that you feel a little bit better about. But, he has the 1 touchdown on the year. That was in week 4 against Philly. Other than that, he's had 2, 3, 4 catches in most games, but, nothing down the field really. Does not have one explosive play on the year. Every single catch has been for less than 20 yards.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So, yeah, I think it's kind of abandoned all hope for me, at least, on this one here. All right. That's enough of that game. Yeah, moving on. Let's talk about a happy game here. We'll stay. We got one more team in the NFC South to discuss in the early slate, and that's Carolina. Kind of a fun game, a little bit there. Carolina gets off to that 14-0 lead. I was on the Rams this week in Survivor, so I was like, Miami was my primary threat. I'm like, all right, would this be a miracle of all miracles? Will we see Miami lose at home? No, we will not. In fact, it won't be close. But for a quarter, it was fun.
Yeah, it's 14-0 Carolina to open this game, and they went 3 and out on their first possession, and you kind of felt like it was going to play out as expected. But 2 3 and outs for the Dolphins on their first 2 possessions, gained only 5 yards, and then 2 of the best drives all year for Bryce Young and this Panthers offense. Made a great throw to Adam Thielen for a touchdown, kind of looping it over a couple of defenders into the back of the end zone. But this is the reason that we're comfortable betting the Miami Dolphins minus 13.5, Jeff. That was one of our plays in Circa Million this week, and obviously did not feel great about it when it was 14-0, but Miami could just pile up points so quickly. And it felt like after forcing, a 4th down stop on the Panthers' 4th drive of the game, the switch flipped for Miami. And that was that. Immediately put together a 3-play touchdown drive on a short field. They put together another touchdown drive just before the half. And of course, after falling down, 14-0, they're leading by 7 at the break. Got a little bit dicey in the second half. Mike White came in relief of Tua, immediately throws a pick 6. But Miami got the ball back, ran the ball every single play on that drive, resulted in a touchdown for Salvon Ahmed. But, this is now like the 3rd or 4th week in a row where if you look at some of the total stats, like Miami got beat in time of possession. They got beat in total plays run. And yet you look at yards per play and, they're 2.1 yards per play better than Carolina. Like they're a weird dichotomy of an offense where they run the ball a ton, but they don't typically control the clock. They don't typically control, the play breakdown because of how quickly they tend to score.
Yeah, that's right. And they don't care about that. They just don't.
No.
It's pretty wild there. So, yeah, it's kind of it is kind of fun to see that. Christian McCaffrey is the leading fantasy point scorer among running backs. Kyron Williams is number 2. But right there is Raheem. No, that's not true. Number 2 is actually Raheem Mostert.
Yes. After this week, it's Mostert, who 34.2 points in PPR leagues this week, which, it felt like kind of an obvious smash spot for him with HOU-NOR being out, but could not have really gone better if you're a Mostert owner, and obviously you're starting him everywhere at this point. That's not even a question. Behind him, Chris Brooks was in the mix. Salvon Ahmed was in the mix. We did not see any of Jeff Wilson this week. Will be interesting to see if he ultimately works his way into the mix. At his practice window opened up this past week from IR. I think he'll be a part of this backfield as long as HOU-NOR is out. But Mostert, very, very clearly the guy at this point. Another huge day for Tyreek Hill, despite going out, missing some time in the second half with a cramp. I initially looked worse. He had a long play, kind of ran to the sideline, was gimpy, kind of reaching at like his hamstring area. And you're thinking cramps was kind of the last thing on my mind at that point. I thought he pulled a hamstring.
Right.
Started to worry. Yeah, I didn't think he was coming back into the game, and you're starting to wonder, okay, what about the next couple of weeks? But he ended up returning, immediately had another big play once he came back into the game. 6 for 163 for Tyreek Hill is just a cheat code every single week. And Adam Thielen still doing what he does, man. 11 for 115 and a touchdown, man. I did not consider drafting Adam Thielen anywhere, and I'm regretting it.
Oh yeah. Well, I kind of thought, okay, sure, he'll get some volume early, but he doesn't have anything left. I thought, oops.
He's wide receiver 3 on the year in PPR leagues.
Yeah, he is. Wow. I mean, and the thing is, with the Panthers 0-6, they're trailing every game, so the volume's always there, and Bryce Young just looks to him all the time. Bryce Young, the touchdown pass to Thielen was a dime. I mean, he threw a pretty pass on that one there. But that was his only touchdown pass. And, he, much like Sam Howell, he's a free sack also. 4 sacks yesterday. Just a sack machine. At least he didn't throw any interceptions this time. So, or put the ball on the ground, which is something different. So good for him on that. Chuba Hubbard looked pretty good, as the sole back. Essentially, Raheem Blackshear got like 5 carries. I thought we'd see more of your guy Laviska Shenault, but he only got 1 carry.
Yeah, I don't know if the NFL stepped in and said he's just too dynamic. It's not fair to the opponent if Laviska Shenault touches the ball too many times. But yeah, I was hoping for that as well. Hubbard looked good. I've always kind of been out on him. The last couple of years he'd had his opportunities whenever McCaffrey would go down, and it always felt like Deontay Foreman just dramatically outplayed him. But 19 for 88 against the Dolphins defense, had a touchdown as well. Didn't really do a whole lot in the passing game. Neither he nor Blackshear made much of an impact there. And yeah, you mentioned with Bryce Young. I mean, this was a fine game for him. It wasn't a disaster, but the thing with him is like he's semi-mobile, but like, if there's any contact whatsoever, like he's going down. Like he has no ability to like bounce off of rushers or really feel that quite yet. It's like if you're getting remotely close to him, he's just kind of going to hit the ground for his own safety, which ends up hurting the Panthers. Carolina 0 for 4. Tried to convert 4th downs in this game as well. They actually moved the ball throughout the game, but some big stops by that Miami defense. And now Miami moving to 5-1. Things are looking good. It feels like they haven't played that well, these last couple of weeks, and they're still, winning games by 3 scores, no problem. They are at the Philadelphia Eagles on Sunday night in Week 7.
Yeah, huge part of the schedule coming up for Miami. You got Eagles, you got the Frankfurt game against the Chiefs coming up. Boy, I can't wait for that one. That's one I don't mind waking up early for, so that should be fun. Carolina, Frank Reich is relinquishing play calling duties.
He is.
His choice, he said. Even though you've got a meddlesome owner in David Tepper who meets with him every week, kind of Jim Irsay sort of vibe right there, or Jerry Jones giving press conferences every week on the injury report. I mean, what? It's the NFL's so weird. But hey, we'll see what happens if that changes anything there. But we'll see. And at some point, we'll see if they trade for that receiver. That's been long rumored if they're going after that. But hey. I tend to think 0-6 teams don't add players, but we'll see.
Hey, got to get Adam Thielen some help.
Yeah, exactly. I actually don't think their wide receiving crew is that bad. I guess they don't
so.
have top end speed. I think that's the one. They don't have anybody to take the top off. Maybe that's their problem there. But DJ Chark isn't getting that done anymore. So let's move on. One more game in the early slate. The Bears against the Vikings. All those positive vibes about Justin Fields gone. Even before he got hurt, terrible day. 6 of 10, 58 yards, a pick, and 4 sacks. He did run for 46 yards. He had that going for him, but honestly, this offense was a total disaster yesterday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we saw Tyson Bagent, of all people, play out most of the second half. I think it was his 3rd snap of the game, fumble 6. That was really the difference for the Minnesota Vikings. And, Bagent looked reasonable after that. I mean, I think it was a pretty disastrous way to begin your NFL career, but led a touchdown drive later in the second half. Bears forced a quick 3 and out after that, had a chance to make things interesting at the end, drove into Minnesota territory. And then we saw Bagent, just throw up a duck, look for DJ Moore in the end zone. Yeah. It was like 15 yards short, easy interception for Byron Murphy for the Vikings who brought that out. And then, after that, Minnesota able to run out the clock. So, I mean, this was as ugly when you see 19-13, like that's a weird score. Something weird has to happen for games to result in 19 points. And this is exactly what that was. I mean, Minnesota did not look great by any means, certainly felt the loss of Justin Jefferson, just 181 yards passing for Kirk Cousins against a Bears defense that has let everybody, kind of walk all over it this season. Vikings were 2 of 13 converting 3rd downs in this game. Had some costly penalties as well, only possessed the ball for about 24 minutes. So it was certainly ugly for Chicago, but the Bears controlled this game in a lot of ways. And that Bagent fumble 6, I think was the ultimate difference maker. Other than that, I thought this was a pretty evenly played game.
Yeah. I saw a Chicago Sun-Times article on Twitter, advocating that Bagent deserves a real chance to win the starting.
I don't know about that.
Like, undrafted free agent out of Shepherd. He did beat out PJ Walker, who we talked about earlier, and Nathan Peterman, which is less of an accomplishment, but still, come on. Justin Fields has his faults, but let's not get too silly here.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to see Bagent on Sunday against the Raiders.
I agree.
But I also think this is Justin Fields' job. All right, when he's back, he's going to be the quarterback, and that could be as soon as week 9. They're at the LA Chargers. We'll see. I'm interested to see how they look against the Raiders. We'll talk about their just dominant victory over the New England Patriots in a moment. But I think that's a relatively soft spot if you're Bagent looking to make your first NFL start. So I don't know. I didn't really see anything that would prompt me to say that this guy needs a chance to be the starter.
No, not at all.
He's going to get it by default, but I don't think this is really an audition. I think it's just a kind of a Band-Aid until Justin Fields is ready. And again, the Athletic reporting earlier this morning that it is a dislocated right thumb for Justin Fields. He's going to avoid surgery. At least that's the hope. And then it's just about that recovering to the point where he could grip the football. And I don't think that's going to be in week 7. So tough spot for the Bears now, sitting at 1-5. Minnesota, meanwhile, 2-4. Still, I don't think the Vikings have really shown me anything to think that this is a team that could explode over the second half of the season. You get the 49ers after this. After that, then it's the Packers, the Falcons, the Saints, the Broncos, the Bears, and the Raiders. So that there is a stretch here where Minnesota could try to get this thing turned around, but this just looks like a pretty toothless offense to me.
Yeah, it really sucks not having Jefferson there. It's a big difference. It hurt. Because this was a very plus matchup, and they very little with it. Madison 18 for 44.
Against the Bears.
Against the Bears. Yeah, exactly. If it weren't for the
defense,
almost
no Cam Akers, by the way. Nine snaps only for Cam Akers, so it was like a 90-10 split for Madison.
Yeah, they've kind of figured out that Akers can't play, but the problem is nobody else can either. So they're back into that boat. But maybe it's a Ty Chandler account again here. I don't know. We'll see.
I don't know, man. I don't know. We saw a lot of CJ Ham, kind of going with these heavier sets for Minnesota. Jordan Addison, thought this might be a smash spot for him. Just 3 catches, did have 5 targets, got in the end zone. So if you started him, ended up being okay. TJ Hawkinson, 6 for 50. But disappointing day overall. I think even post Jefferson, we knew this offense would fall off. But like you said, I mean, this was kind of like the best spot to begin this stretch without Justin Jefferson, and the passing game just couldn't get anything. I mean, 5.8 yards per attempt for Kirk Cousins.
Yep. Kirk Cousins, by the way, has a full no trade clause and said he doesn't plan to waive it. That could just be a negotiating posture, or he needs to be demonstrated he's landing in the right situation. And maybe this might be a "don't trade me to the Jets" sort of comment. I don't know. But regardless, there you go. Let's move on to the afternoon slate. Let's you alluded to it. Let's talk about that barn burner game between the Raiders and the Pats. Also known as me getting a miracle cover on the Raiders there with the safety for the cover. You got to love that. 21-17 is the final. It was a 3-point spread on that one there. The Raiders were the dominant team the whole time. They deserve, somehow they didn't deserve because they couldn't put the ball away and when they were in the red zone. But they were the better side the entire game, and somehow the Pats had the ball with a 2-point deficit, a chance even to win the game. Instead, they give up the safety sack where just a couple of the worst blocks you'll ever see, and on that sack by Max Crosby, beat 2 guys. They were like ole, but it was pretty funny.
Yeah, the right tackle especially. There was a view that they showed kind of on like a reverse view, and he just totally whiffed on one of the best pass rushers. Didn't even get a hand on him in the NFL, and Max Crosby. And extra frustrating if you're a New England +3 better, because at one point on that drive it was 2nd and 4 from the 15. Then they had a hold, and then they had a delay of game on 3rd and 11 to back them up to the 4-yard line and make it to the point where Mac Jones is getting that snap in the end zone. So it never should have come to that. It's not like the Raiders punted and pinned him at the 1-yard line. I mean, New England backed itself essentially into a safety situation. That was like the one thing you could not have if you were betting New England. And of course it happened. You kind of knew as soon as the ball was snapped, like Crosby was so far in the backfield that there was just really nothing that Mac Jones could do. In New England, interestingly, they were down 9, kind of going into the 4th quarter, put together a 17-play, almost 10-minute scoring drive to make this a 2-point game. And it's like, all right, that's all well and good, but they burned off so much time on that touchdown drive that it almost came back to hurt them. I mean, by the time they scored and kicked it back to the Raiders, I mean, it was like 3 minutes left in the game.
Yeah, that's right. But that's what they can do. I mean, they have no playmakers. I mean,
None.
It's Kendrick Bourne getting 8 here, 7 there, 9 there. Ramondre Stevenson, he actually got in the end zone this time, and his per carry numbers were a little bit better, caught 5 passes. So this is a promising game in a way, but Zeke was on the field more, had a long run called back. Otherwise, Zeke would have had the better day. I don't know. It's hard to see a whole lot of hope for the Pats. I mean, they're quietly. I meant to mention in the Bears breakdown that the Bears have currently have the top 2 picks in next year's draft. Yeah. But the Pats are right there for in the Caleb Williams sweepstakes.
Well, and they got the Bills and the Dolphins the next 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So there's a pretty good chance this is going to be a 1-8 team. And honestly, they should probably be 0-6 right now. You think back to that Jets game where it was the broken coverage. I forget who was like their 3rd string tight end broke loose for a long play. It's like you take that away, and that was really the only thing they got on offense in that game against the Jets. I mean, it's gone from bad to worse, right? And this is one of those spots where it's one thing to get blown out at Dallas. I think we all kind of saw that coming. It's another thing to lose 34-0 coming off of that blowout at home against the Saints. But this spot right here against the Raiders, Bill Belichick, it feels like, has always had this huge advantage against his former pupils, going up against Josh McDaniels. Like this was a game that in the past, the Patriots would always find a way to win. And the fact that they couldn't get it done. And once again, like you said, I mean, there are a few bad teams in the NFL right now. Like none of them have trouble generating chunk plays in the way that the Patriots do. There's one long play to Kendrick Bourne on the day. There's a big drop by Devontae Parker, by the way, in the 4th quarter that could have changed things for New England. But that aside, I mean, there's nobody that you're worried about on if you're an opposing defense. It's like who do you have to say, all right, we got to shut this guy down or we're going to be in trouble. Like there's nobody. It's a team that's filled with a bunch of like 3rd and 4th receivers.
Yeah, it's just remarkable bad drafts in a row here. By the way, this is 2 years in a row they found a way to lose at Las Vegas. Last year was the Jacoby Myers unbelievable lateral. And now Myers is back on the other side of the coin, putting his team through the torture chamber. On the Raiders side, Michael Mayer, 5 for 75. Love seeing that. Myers, 5 for 61. Devontae Adams only had 2 catches. So, and granted, Jimmy G got hurt in this game. We saw Brian Hoyer. Brian Hoyer hit the one big play to Trey Tucker that pretty much saved their game. And then, because otherwise, I think that they were going to be in a little bit of trouble there. It was 13-3, I think, at the time. They got some points off of that drive, or 13-10 at the time. It's just, the Pats had just scored, is getting close, and now Jimmy G's out. And they got some points at least out of that, but they really struggled in the red zone otherwise.
Yeah, they did. And, I think even when you're bringing in a veteran backup quarterback like Brian Hoyer, things change. The playbook tightens up a little bit. You're not quite as comfortable running some of your normal stuff. And that certainly hurt the Raiders in the red zone. 1 of 6 converting red zone opportunities on Sunday. Certainly could have been a game that was more slanted in favor of Vegas. Jimmy G, by the way, ended up in the hospital getting checked out for that back injury. So no firm update on him quite yet. I mean, I think given that he was in the hospital 12 hours ago, pretty good chance that we see Brian Hoyer or perhaps Aiden O'Connell, if he's healthy, next week against the Chicago Bears and what will be just an all-time ugly game. You mentioned Michael Mayer. That was kind of the one big fantasy takeaway here. Like there's nothing to say about New England at this point. It's just the same story every single week. Like we can keep trying to like scrape together some positives for Ramondre Stevenson, but that situation is what it is. Michael Mayer played 100% of offensive snaps when the Raiders were in 12, 21, and 22 personnel. That's via PFF. That always does great breakdowns of each of these games. Also played almost 75% of snaps in 11 personnel. So the last few weeks, first 5 games of the year, he was only in at about a third of plays in 11 personnel. So we've seen his snaps now rise in 4 consecutive weeks for the Raiders. So something to keep an eye on. If you don't have one of those top 6 or 7 tight ends and you kind of feel like you're reeling week to week or just kind of pulling guys off the waiver wire, Michael Mayer is somebody who's on the way up.
Yeah, absolutely. A team that's on the way up is the Detroit Lions. Big win on the road without any running game. They lose David Montgomery early in this one. They were already without Jahmyr Gibbs. They still win comfortably on the road at Tampa. It was close for a while. And then after the Monroe St. Brown touchdown, they made it 10-3. It felt like, okay, we've got this. And they get the next touchdown. Okay, now they definitely have it. Goff, 353, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions on the road.
This was the type of game I feel like that Detroit would get tripped up in years past, maybe even last season, right? When they began this ascent, it was like, all right, kind of an obvious trap game. You're going on the road, team coming off of a bye. Bucks are 3-1. Mike Evans is playing. And, this was a game where Detroit was not able to get anything going on the ground. And I think that gives even more credit to Jared Goff. Like, it's one thing it's one thing when you're bludgeoning a team on the ground, they have to prepare for that, and you kind of get to pick your spots through the air. But that was not the case. Like, this game was 100% on the shoulders of Jared Goff, and I think given the circumstances, this is one of the best games of his career. Like, we know about his struggles, outside versus indoors. Like, obviously this game was down in Florida, warm weather, outdoors, looked great. The Lions lost David Montgomery early in this game due to injury. So the running game was not really doing anything while he was in there, but it went from bad to worse once he left. Craig Reynolds, 10 carries for 15 yards. But Jared Goff, put this team on his shoulders, and I thought played one of the better games of his career, at least his Detroit Lions career. Huge afternoon for Amon-Ra St. Brown, 12 for 124 and a touchdown. And our guy, Jameson Williams, Jeff, 45-yard touchdown. I still don't want to start him. I think it's understandable to hold him on a roster, but it's still so boom or bust with Jameson Williams. Only 3 targets on the day. Snap count is still really low, but this is what he offers.
Yeah, that even the touchdown was a little fluky. He adjusted in the air like 3 times. I felt like he's like turn again, and hey, made a good catch, but it was like it was kind of still a weird play. But you're right. Volume's definitely not going to be there for Williams. But who knows? They may still have to throw it a bunch. They play Baltimore at Baltimore next week.
Very fun game.
Yeah, it should be a fun game. We'll see what running back is available for them. And they could be down their top 2. It could be a Craig Reynolds start, which means you might see another 40 throws for Jared Goff. Who knows? Baltimore, we had a question in the comments about Baltimore from Herman asking, how do you see Baltimore's running back usage change with Keaton Mitchell activated? I mean, we didn't see a whole lot of anything there this past week, but I mean, they're looking for playmakers. Baltimore is. I think Justice Hill has that capability. Gus Edwards doesn't really. Gus Edwards is a plotter.
Yeah, and Gus Edwards got 2/3 of the share in terms of carries, 16-8 against Tennessee. Like you mentioned, Keaton Mitchell, he didn't take a single snap. So maybe at some point they work him in. I don't know if they still want him to get up to speed after coming off of IR, but I don't think that we see a dramatic snap count for him. I think he'll be on the field in week 7, but I don't think you go from 0 to playing 25 plus snaps. So if anything, I think he's probably the clear number 3 right now.
Yeah. Braden Winter asks a Detroit related question. Do I trade Joe Mixon for Jahmyr Gibbs? I'd say no. Because even before Gibbs got hurt, the usage wasn't there. I mean, there's a game where Montgomery didn't play and Gibbs still didn't get massive usage.
Yeah, and we'll see on Montgomery. If we get a report, it was a rib injury for him. If he's out for significant time, maybe that changes things as far as your outlook for Jahmyr Gibbs. But you said exactly what I was going to, which was we kind of had him in the perfect setup already this season, and the Lions still did not want to use him. I think the Atlanta game stands out as, 38 snaps, 17 carries. That's what we want to see from Jahmyr Gibbs. But, against Green Bay the following week, played 10 fewer snaps. He had the game, I think it was week 2 against Seattle, where he had 7 catches. But that's the other thing, is like the usage in the passing game has not been quite consistent enough for me to offset the fact that they want to use him as a distant number 2 in the running game. So I know, Mixon's not as exciting by any means, but I'd rather have him and just get that floor week to week.
Yeah. And speaking of the Baltimore running backs against Detroit, Detroit's number 1 against the run right now. So
this defense is for real. And they're missing guys too. I mean, they're missing some key players on the defensive end, and it has not mattered. I thought Detroit was overrated. I thought they were going to be a team that would make the playoffs, but wouldn't really sniff that upper tier in the NFC. But I think they are very, very clearly the 3rd best team in the NFC. And if you want to make the case against Philly or against San Francisco, I think there's now reason to at least have that conversation.
Yeah. Prior to this week, I thought there was a teardrop for sure between San Francisco, Philly, and then to Detroit. I would still say there's a teardrop between a healthy San Francisco to Detroit. But I think the gap between Detroit and Philly has narrowed at least a little bit. But then again, because I don't think Philly completely has their offensive mojo right now. I think they do miss they miss their offensive coordinator. They have a new offensive coordinator, obviously, this year. We'll get to Philly in a second because there's some baffling things going on there. In fact, let's go ahead and move on to that game right now. Philly found a way to lose this game against the Jets. I mean, the Jets, credit them for hanging around. Their defense played their butts off in this game, I thought. They made things incredibly uncomfortable for Philly in the second half of the game. I don't see why Hurts was throwing it on 3rd and 9 right around the 2-minute warning. Run some clock, make Zach Wilson beat you. I think that's a pretty good formula instead of what happened.
Well, and that was after the 2-minute warning that occurred. So it's like, it sounded like he even had this automatic clock stop coming up.
Right, exactly.
And that's what's so crazy. And then of course the Jets turn around and like, it almost felt like out of excitement. They're just like kind of lost their mind and ran that thing in for a touchdown. You're thinking, all right, like, you're at that point, you're down 2. And I mean, they were set up at what, like the 8-yard line. I mean, it's a gimme field goal at that point. And I think Philly still had two timeouts,
and like it was a minute 40. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So for one, Philly, should have just run the ball and punted on 3rd down. They did not do that. And then, the Jets get it back. And all you got to do at that point is, you're not going to be able to run it all the way down, but you could have run it under a minute. And, you're assuming you make the field goal, you go up 1, and you're kicking it back to Philly, and they'll have 35 to 40 seconds to basically go 80 yards and beat you. So, I don't know.
It was, you wouldn't have to go that far though, because you would have been up 1. So I think Hull was fine scoring on this one here. And I argue this on Twitter a little bit because the 2 timeouts were key. Elliott's made a 60-yarder before. Now I know he missed a field goal earlier in the game, but we know he's capable of a long distance kick. Mm-hmm. If you're only up 1, then you lose to a field goal. So I could see it, and because if they get it to 3rd down, then all of a sudden Philly's going to play defense, and you're not guaranteed the touchdown.
Right.
And
not at all.
Strange things happen. You could have a hold, you could have a turnover. I was okay with the touchdown. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, fair enough. With the 2 timeouts, it makes it a debate, because again, you don't have the opportunity to run it down to 4 seconds and kick that field goal. So yeah, I understand that. But it was just funny how quickly it all happened. Like I think the commentators even noted, like, I don't know if they wanted to score that. But it's a lot easier said than done, to like fall down at, I think maybe ideally you go down like right at the goal line and feel good about pushing it in after making Philly burn another timeout or 2. But like you said, you don't want to get to that 3rd, even if you're at the 1-inch line against the Eagles defensive line, you don't want to feel like you have 1 down to push that in there. So I get that. The bigger takeaway for me, I mean, obviously everybody's going to talk about Jalen Hurts throwing 3 picks. It was bad. One of them was I didn't really think on him, but the one at the end was just a brutal decision by Jalen Hurts to even throw that ball.
Yep.
Philadelphia could not run on this Jets defense. This was an amazing game from start to finish for the Jets defense. DeAndre Swift, 10 carries for 18 yards. We haven't seen him bottled up remotely like that all season. Philly finished with just 80 yards rushing as a team, and over half of those were Jalen Hurts, who had 47 yards on 8 carries. So, I mean, this was the first time all year that Philly had really been shut down like that on the ground. They did lose Lane Johnson in this game. Does sound like he's avoided a long-term injury. I believe it was a high ankle, so could miss some time in the short term, but doesn't look like it's anything that's going to be compromising as far as what it means for Philly over the rest of the regular season.
Yeah, and it affected that game. I think it did change the game because Philly got their 2 touchdowns in the first half, right? Yeah. So I think it's not a coincidence that they struggled after Johnson got hurt. I think that Hurts had less time, and obviously, like you said, they couldn't run the ball at all.
Had a big fumble too before half.
Yeah,
they were driving again. Like they had just put their second touchdown on the board, held the Jets to a field goal. We're over midfield, and then DeAndre Swift had a big fumble. I think if you're Philly, you're thinking at least 3 points before half, and that turned into a field goal for the Jets.
Yeah. The Jets, Zach Wilson had a rough day, to be expected against Philly's defense. Only 186 yards, 5 sacks, but no interceptions. Pretty huge. No fumbles. Also pretty huge. The other thing is they got the ball in the hands of their stars. Yep. Garrett Wilson had 8 catches for 90. Should have had a big gainer, but Allen Lazard had a baffling penalty. Breece Hall got the touchdown as we saw, but he had 12 carries and 5 catches, which you like to see. They didn't mess around too much with Dalvin Cook anymore. That's no longer a timeshare. That is a straight up backup role now. That's all that is.
Yeah, and that is you're comfortable dropping Dalvin Cook if you haven't already. I mean, he played 9 snaps in this game. He is, if anything, I think he's their 3rd back, right? I mean, Michael Carter played 13 snaps and had just as much of a workload. He's in there in more passing situations. So yeah, Dalvin Cook, I mean, I wouldn't call him a bust just because I think there was enough skepticism about what the role would ultimately be, but it's been pretty much worst case scenario through 6 weeks, and you could go ahead and cut him. Garrett Wilson, you mentioned it was a pretty gross day once again for Zach Wilson, but 8 for 90 for Garrett Wilson. Should have had that other long one with Lazard on the penalty. He's wide receiver 18 through 6 games. And of course, some teams have had their bye, so there's a little noise there. But does this feel like pretty much best case scenario based on how we were talking about him coming out of the Rodgers injury? It was like fire sale. Get rid of Garrett Wilson if you can. And look, he's not going to reach anywhere near the heights that we thought he could. But the fact that he's in the top 20 with 6 games of Zach Wilson, I think you have to view that as a win. Like, he's still been a double-digit scorer just about every week.
Yeah, he has. And, better times are coming too. They have the bye week now. They've had a pretty tough schedule stretch.
Yes, they
Now
have.
they get Giants, Chargers, Raiders, Bills. Okay, that's going to be a tough one. Although Bills have some key personnel losses. Dolphins, Falcons, Texans, Dolphins again. Point is, there are opportunities here for them, at least offensively. These, you're not exactly running up against Murderers Row. You do have a Cleveland game late in December. That's going to be a tough one there. And then at the Pats to end the season, that'll probably be ugly weather-wise and maybe ugly altogether. But yeah, if you're a Garrett Wilson manager, I think you've done all right so far.
Yeah, I think this is just about best case scenario, and it hasn't been pretty. It's been a lot on Garrett Wilson's shoulders as far as bringing in some passes that are not located where they need to be located, to put it nicely. But you'll take it. Like, the one thing you can say is the volume has not really dropped off, and that's kind of all you can ask for in this situation.
Yeah, exactly right. One other afternoon game, the Rams rallied to beat the Cardinals for a half. This was ugly football for the Rams. And then from the first play on in the second half, it was a completely different game. They just ran it down the Cardinals' throat. Yep. Cardinals couldn't stop Kyren Williams at all, and the Rams defense stepped up a little bit too. The Cardinals seem like they're that well-coached, feisty team that's just totally undermanned, and they just wear down in second halves.
Yeah, and that's where the talent deficit, I think, comes into play. And they got away with it a few times early in the season. I think we're starting to see, some of the attrition that they've had, and just, again, some of the inexperience, both on the coaching staff and on this roster. But they hung around in this game for longer than I would have expected. The Rams got away from the run. Not that they've been a great running team, but they just barely ran the ball at all in the first half, and then came out, I think, with like 8 straight running plays in the second, and really established Kyren Williams, who had a huge day, 158. And a score. And that's not to say the passing game wasn't working. Had some bad breaks that kind of go against them in the first half to see some drives end. But Cooper Kupp, 7 for 148 and a score. Like, he looks like he's fully back at this point. I mean, these last 2 weeks have been really convincing. Was not a great afternoon for Puka Nacua, just 4 for 26, but still had 7 targets. I think you'll live with those numbers and kind of play the averages on that going forward. Saw a little bit of Ronnie Rivers, saw a little bit of Zach Evans, but this is very clearly Kyren Williams' backfield right now, which is not something I thought I would be saying at any point this season. But he's been really productive. If you grabbed him early on, that's been a big win. Frustrating week for the Amari DiMercato versus Keontae Ingram debate. Ingram ended up winning that one fairly handily, but neither guy did a whole lot. Ingram 10 for 40. We saw DiMercato carry it only twice, and it was Ingram that had 2 receptions as well for 11 yards. So not a ton of production either way there, but if you had to choose one or the other, hopefully you went with Ingram.
Yeah, well, Damian Williams parachuted in and had more carries than DiMercato, and that was always fun. Yeah. A couple other notes here. Puka Nacua dropped a touchdown pass on the first drive. Would have changed his line, would have changed the flow of the game. They settled for a field goal on that drive. They, obviously they were trailing for most of the first half. Kyren Williams got hurt at the end of the game, hurt his ankle a little bit. Ronnie Rivers got hurt in this game at the end, hurt his knee. So Zach Evans could be a good pickup this week. You might see him be the guy that is your leading ball carrier next week.
Yeah, Williams set for an MRI today. So within the next few hours, we should have a little bit more clarity on what his status could end up being for week 7. Rams are home for the Pittsburgh Steelers, which is going to be a pretty ugly game, I think, in a lot of ways. Although I enjoy watching this Rams team, and I did not see that being the case. I thought this would be kind of another ugly transitional year, especially defensively. You have your concerns, but this defense has stepped up. The offense has been really, really fun to watch. The passing game with Matthew Stafford rolling. They're a somewhat dangerous team to me, and they're absolutely in the mix to make the playoffs. In the NFC, got the Steelers, they got the Cowboys, the Packers, the Seahawks, and the Cardinals again coming up over their next 5 games. So a few winnable games in that stretch, no question.
Yeah, we're going to see a lot of black and gold in that stadium next week.
Oh, yes.
Pittsburgh travels well, and Rams fans are willing to sell. So it's a good combo there. Let's hit up the night game here. This all-time instant classic between the Giants and the Bills. It was not the blowout that everybody was anticipating, not even remotely close to that. It was still an ugly game, a terrible game. But, if you're Buffalo, win's a win. for my survivor purposes, I really would have liked to have seen the Giants hang on to this one. Baffling end of half sequences, especially the end of the first half there. How do you hand the ball off there when you have no timeouts left? Audible to that. Tyrod Taylor played okay until that decision.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you were able to see some of this. I saw you tweeted that you were going to be able to focus on the ALCS, which ended up being
two TVs, my friend.
That's what it's all about, baby. 2 TVs is the absolute minimum in the year 2023. I'll tell you that. Yeah, I mean, this was just a horrific performance by the Bills, a game that they probably should have lost. And, that play at the end of the first half loomed large. Brian Daboll was so upset that he couldn't even talk about it. I think they came out at halftime and the sideline reporter was like, yeah, I asked him. And he was like, respectfully, I can't do this right now. He was so upset with Tyrod Taylor. And it's not often that you see a coach just kind of outright blame a player, but I kind of empathize with Brian Daboll. I believe Brian Daboll that he did not say, hey, check into a run here with no timeouts and 7 seconds on the clock. I don't know what, I mean, to check into a run in that situation, you have to be obviously 100% sure that you're getting that touchdown. And I mean, it was blown up immediately. I think there was the Giants sideline was upset that I think a Bills player was kind of holding Saquon Barkley to the ground. It wasn't going to matter. I mean, you weren't going to be able to get the field goal unit out there, get a spike off. Really wasn't even close by the time they tried to get everybody lined up, and that was big. That was big. That would have been made it a 2-score game going into the half. Giants were getting the ball coming out of halftime as well. They ended up not doing anything on that drive, although they got into Buffalo territory, ended up taking a sack and having to punt in the Bills territory. But Buffalo, credit to them. I mean, nothing really felt like they never got into a groove other than Stephon Diggs. He was kind of the only saving grace for this Bills offense, but they put together 2 back-to-back long touchdown drives, kind of shortened this game, which is not typically what you want if you're the team favored by 14.5. You want as many possessions as you can get. But the way that this game flow was going, Buffalo just needed to settle down, stop turning the ball over. They had a pick, they had a fumble in the first half. They put together a 17-play, 10-minute touchdown drive in the third quarter, then put together a 12-play, 7-minute touchdown drive to ultimately go up 14-9. But after missing a field goal that would have made it an 8-point game, it got really dicey. And this came down to 2 plays at the goal line.
Yeah, it really did. And Giants had a chance at the end. Maybe penalty might have been missed on the Bills, possibly. There too.
I thought it was a penalty, but I given the situation, I was okay. And I don't like saying that you should call it differently, based on game flow or based on time of where you are on the clock. But I felt like it was an okay no call. There was definitely some grabbing there, but it wasn't that egregious.
Yeah. Agreed. I don't know. It depends on how the game was being reffed the entire game, right? To me, if it's been tightly officiated, let's call it Cleveland, San Francisco, for instance, then you got to call that there, right? If they've been letting them play a little bit, maybe not. This was more on the closer to the Cleveland, San Francisco standard. The combined 16 penalties in this game. Some key ones like Giants had a sack wiped out because of the whole body weight thing. I don't know. What do you think?
All right, I think I cut out for a second there. So what was the question?
Okay, so I was just saying sometimes it's how a game is being officiated matters a little bit too. There were 16 total penalties in this game. It wasn't quite Cleveland, San Francisco, but it was tight. But Giants had a penalty wiped out on a questionable roughing call, for instance, there. All right, I think Nick's internet is being a little shaky for him right now. So, anywho, I think we'll move on from this game. Quick. Sorry, say that again.
Yeah, I apologize to the live viewers here. The internet's not been great. Can you hear me now, Jeff?
Yes, you're good now.
Okay, all right, we're back. Well, what I was saying is that there was a penalty on the previous play too, which kind of brought the ball back to the 1-yard line for that final play. So you wonder if it's kind of in the back of the referee's mind of all right, we're not giving you that call twice, but it certainly could have been called. Although I mean, it wouldn't have really impacted anything at that point. It would have just given Buffalo or given New York another chance from the same yardage spot, right? So I think it's a little bit different there as opposed to moving the ball up 10 or 15 yards. But either way, felt like a game that the Giants let slip away. And I think Tyrod Taylor looked okay to me. 24 or 36 for 200 against this Bills defense. I think you'll take that. not a great sign when Tyrod Taylor could basically come in off the street and play just as well, if not better, than the guy that you just gave a huge contract to. That to me is a bit concerning. Mobility wise, he's similar to Daniel Jones in some ways. So I get that, but I mean, this Giants season just continues to go off the rails. They're 1-5. They do have the Commanders, Jets, and Raiders coming up, so a chance to maybe build some momentum here. But this feels like a 4 to 5 win team at best.
Yeah, and this was a Tyrod Taylor revenge game. It was this former team, the Bills, underrated. People didn't realize that. I didn't factor that into the projections.
Sure.
I like watching Jeff Feinberg and Pat Mayo when they do theirs, and Tim Anderson when they do their YouTube stream. And Jeff Feinberg always talks about first game for a substitute quarterback is good, and then after that, there's film on them and all that. So I feel like if Tyrod starts next week, it could be ugly. So we'll see about that. Anywho, let's talk about tonight's game real quick. You got the Cowboys against the Chargers. Chargers were my best bet. I thought they should be a 3-point favorite in this game. Instead, they're underdogs, or maybe I said they should be a pick 'em. I forgot what I said. Point is, I was strongly opposed, and I'm a fool maybe to bet on the Chargers because the chargering is usually fierce, but they get Eckler back tonight. I just feel like there's good vibes set up for the Chargers here.
Yeah, we'll see on Justin Herbert's finger, right? I mean, it is his non-throwing hand, so I'm not super concerned about it. It's more about some of the smaller limitations. Is he comfortable getting under center? It's more so like, all right, if you're getting sacked, can you get the same grip on the ball to avoid a fumble, things like that. But getting Austin Eckler back is huge. I mean, this is a team that could not do anything on the ground without Austin Eckler, and I think he's still probably the best in the league at turning nothing into something. And Josh Kelly is kind of the opposite of that. So I see the Chargers love. I mean, they're down to 1.5 point dogs. I think it was as high as 2.5 earlier in the week, but this does feel like a kind of an obvious bounce back spot for Dallas. The question is, are they good enough to do it? Because, I think we could start to question the resume, and, the games in which they've looked great this season have come against some of the worst teams in the league, like the Giants and the Jets and New England Patriots. Yep. And, they struggled against Arizona. They look terrible against San Francisco. LA coming off of the bye. I think you have a long chance to scheme here. And we also have a coordinator revenge game with Kellen Moore going up against the Cowboys. So I don't like to factor that stuff too much into my evaluation. Like, is that part of it for you? Like Kellen Moore, wants to unleash some things against his former team?
No. I joke about the revenge game. I don't think it's a thing. I don't think it's a real thing that much. Maybe there are instances where it could be, but for a coordinator, come on. I know like the Jets celebrated on behalf of Hackett against the Broncos, but it's not because of Hackett that they won. Let's not kid ourselves on this one here. Yeah. It's because Russell Wilson has an inexplicable fumble, for instance. I mean, that's more. Hackett had nothing to do with that. Maybe even taught him how to fumble that. I don't know. It's possible, but question from Z Money: do I start Joshua Palmer or Quentin Johnston because Palmer is questionable? I think coming out of the bye, you start Johnston anyhow. I firmly believe this is the time when these rookies kind of get their sea legs. They come back after the bye. They've installed some packages for them. I think you're going to see Johnston do more than Palmer.
Yeah, we saw Palmer outsnap Johnston before the bye, 55-32. I do think we probably see that gap narrow a bit tonight. Like you said, coming out of the bye, like that's typically when you see a rookie wide receiver have a difference-making game. We saw it with JSN yesterday against Cincinnati. Took a big leap. So if it's going to happen for Quentin Johnston, this should be the spot. I think this Dallas secondary has looked significantly more exploitable since losing Trayvon Diggs. And for what it's worth on Palmer, I think he's going to play. I mean, the latest report is that he's expected to play. Technically still questionable, but I do think we see him out there. Mm-hmm. Johnson to me is a little bit riskier. I think there's more upside with Quentin Johnston, but I think if you're kind of trying to protect a lead in a league, I would maybe lean Josh Palmer.
All right, there you have it. All right. That covers the whole slate. There is one other question here in the forum. I'll throw this to you real quick, Nick, before we sign off. Jimbo Fisher asks, Zach Moss and Jalen Waddle for Stephon Diggs in a PPR league. Moss might be losing more touches. Waddle, scores yesterday, and he's in a part of a great offense, but he's the number 2. And Diggs is obviously the number 1 for his team.
I think I just want Stephon Diggs at this point. So, I think, obviously you don't feel great about parting ways with Moss, but I think his best days are pretty clearly behind him, barring an injury to Jonathan Taylor. We already saw, that snap share, basically closed to 50-50 this past week. So, if you look at it as you're trading a backup running back plus Jalen Waddle for Stephon Diggs, I think that's a pretty good deal. I mean, Diggs has gone, 4 straight weeks now, over 100 yards. He and A.J. Brown are the only receivers in the NFL who can say that? And even these games where Buffalo's offenses look shaky, like he's been the one constant. So yeah, I say go ahead, make that deal, get Stephon Diggs on your team.
I agree. Because this might be the last week you can trade Moss as part of a significant plus too.
Yes.
So yeah, I go ahead and do it now. Yep. Don't wait. Let somebody use them for their bye week issues, and you get the best player in the deal in Diggs. So good concept there. Good question.
All right. One last thing, Jeff, before we go
out.
We did just get an update on the Rams running back situation from Ian Rappaport. Good news on Kyren Williams, just a run-of-the-mill ankle sprain for him. He'll be questionable for week 7. Sounds like a true 50-50 as of now. Not looking so good for Ronnie Rivers. Grade 3 PCL sprain for him. So that'll knock him out for at least 4 to 5 weeks per Ian Rappaport. But good news overall on Kyren Williams. Still could be, could still see like one Zach Evans game. But no reason to panic if you're a Kyren Williams owner.
Right. But if you are desperate for a running back this weekend by apocalypse, at least we know Evans is your target. So there you go. You get some definition there. All right. That will wrap up today's pod. Tomorrow we'll have more injury report news, and of course means more ability to kind of size up the free agent pool. Jake and Joe will be doing that for you. So make sure to tune in for that. Hit that subscribe button here if you're watching the stream on YouTube. Really appreciate you. That way you get notifications whenever we get ready to launch, and you can check us up on that. And it helps us out as well. So I appreciate you guys listening. Good luck in week 7. Take care.